What do you think you would excel at? If you're not in the top 50, in the top 25%, if you're not pretty good at what you're doing, especially as an athlete, you're not going to stick with it and you're not going to enjoy it.
Hey everyone, welcome to Momentum Elite Sports Business Podcast. Today we have another very special guest from New York, Matt Rogers. Welcome to the show.
How are you tonight? Thank you so much for having me.
Well, hey, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I know we were just discussing before we started the podcast on how you used to be alone in the subway going to work every morning, and now it's finally getting back to how it used to be, how New York used to be. That's some positive news, I think, all around the world. So I think everybody watching, listening, things are getting back to normal. For everyone watching, listening, Matt, what are you doing today? What is keeping you busy? And maybe share a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So quick background, I have held positions for over a decade in everything from high-level club USA swimming. I was a US Open competitor myself. Swimming was my sport. I grew up playing, 5 different sports until high school. So I was a multi-sport athlete for quite some time until I was about 16. Did a year of coaching. My last coaching position before I went to the corporate world was at St. Joseph's College in Brooklyn, a small Division III school, which was an excellent opportunity, a really tight-knit group. We had 150 student athletes, and the athletic director there did an excellent job in the couple of years he was there. He grew that program. He pretty much doubled the amount of student athletes there. Wow. And everyone was really involved on campus. So we had, 10 to 15% of all students at a small school were athletes. It was really a great thing to be a part of. So that was where I ended my, my coaching and sports career officially. Still as a recruiter now in financial services. I really enjoy visiting athletic departments, speaking with individuals on the phone, giving them my recommendations, besides obviously, filling roles that I might have for them personally. But getting back to campuses is something I look forward to. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, but things are bustling in New York. And I've had many conversations with a number of recent graduates or people who are in school in preparation for this podcast and some other projects I've worked on in the past couple of weeks. So I really think I have some good information for everybody here today.
Awesome. I mean, I'm curious to know, do you recruit student athletes today in your role today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I try to, of course, because they're excellent individuals to bring on board. So it's definitely a focus, developing relationships with campuses, with career departments, with athletic departments, obviously, because that's my background. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think many different industries are interested in that because they have obviously been in a difficult environment before, really great ponds to fish in, to use a cliche term. So I think a lot of companies in a lot of areas are very interested in student athletes.
Well, everybody listening, watching, hey, Matt's your guy. Make sure you hit him up after the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll leave my LinkedIn there. That's probably the social that I use the most now in the corporate world, obviously.
Yes, if you are watching this, look at the notes here. Matt's LinkedIn is right at the bottom.
Great.
Matt, so let's go back in earlier life. So how do you start swimming? How do you start athletics? What was it that led to you to become somebody who's just into athletics? What was growing up like?
Sure. My family was definitely into sports. My parents, we were a beach family, so I grew up on the beach. So I was in the pool and in the water all the time as a baby, as a kid. My dad coached a lot of the sports that I played in the younger years. And I shouldn't say that I don't coach anymore. I made a mistake before. The college job was not my last job. I now coach 4- and 5-year-old T-ball. So that's so that's been my favorite coaching experience so far with my kids. So continuing the coaching tradition, but just being around it was always something that we did. We went to sports camps, as a kid, and just really enjoyed summertime being out of school, and it was just an active family, and swimming became my thing. I think just because I was exposed to it so much, but like I said, I didn't highly specialize until later on in high school.
And as you were in high school, you said, "Hey, swimming's my thing. I'm going to go hard." How did that journey take you further? Did you then go to NCAA to swim in a college, or did you look at some of the Olympic style or workouts? How was that whole journey for you?
Sure. Well, I was on, recreational level teams for many different sports, like I was saying before: basketball, baseball, swimming, tennis, for my whole life as a young kid. And then when I became, right around 15 or 16, I kind of dropped the other sports and freshman, probably like sophomore year of high school, got involved with swimming. Saw a big progression, joined a year-round club team. So that was my first exposure to a year-round program really in any sport. And got involved with that and had a lot of success in high school. And actually, competed in the U.S. Open when I was 19.
Wow.
I actually got out of high-level competing pretty early. I didn't really continue it through college because I got into coaching at 19, and I started coaching for my old high school on Long Island here, Chaminade, which has a huge alumni presence. It's a big lacrosse swimming school, a big business school in New York City as well, a great alumni presence in the city. So I started coaching, and that was my first coaching job as one of the assistants at that program. And I got into that, like I said, at 19, and I continued to work through college and, started my strength and conditioning business and my private swimming business as well, to put me through the college time, and kind of just continued that and built upon it as I graduated undergrad.
So how was that transition from being a competitive level swimmer to now being a coach and an entrepreneur? How was that like, especially in the beginning, the few years?
Sure. Someone else asked me about this one time, and I had to think about it for a second, because it wasn't something, I went from a really busy schedule of being, the athlete, to basically the same type of, demanding schedule as the coach. So it wasn't that different. I mean, I was going to school in undergrad the same way. So I really didn't think of it as a transition. I still worked out, I still trained, I still did competitions recreationally for a long time, just for fun, triathlons, lifeguard competitions in the summers. So it wasn't as much of a transition. I just kept building upon different positions and, networking, working. I built my coaching career from that first job. I then got hired by another coach who coached me in high school, and we started working on an adult program, a master's swimming program with him that I actually did for over a decade as well, and got into triathlon training, mostly coaching the swimming portion of it. And then I started to develop my personal business out of that, out of working with people one-on-one, and also, coaching kids and teaching swim lessons over the summer as well, at people's homes.
You said a very interesting point here that I always love to ask all the guests that come here. What principles did you apply from your time as a swimmer, time as a coach, into now making money as your business? What were some transferable or things you're like, what, this is stuff that I used to do when I was training, and this exactly translates really well to business. I never thought it would, but I did. Yeah.
Definitely. This came up fairly recently. I was interviewing a candidate, and it's the first person that brought up time management in a long time in an interview. It just hasn't come up in a while. Yeah. But it's an important factor for no matter what industry or career you go into, or athletics. So I think that was definitely one of them. Again, to that theme I was talking about before, I sort of took it for granted. I didn't even really consider it a transition, but the time management aspect of it is huge. Recently we did some continuing education at work, and my team got together, and our boss said, please present just 5 or 10 minutes of something that you think you're good at that can help the team. We have a team of about 7 people. We all basically have the same function. And what I talked about was time management and setting up an ideal calendar. So one of the things that I always did, and this will help any athlete or anybody in business, especially if you're working for yourself or self-employed, is I set up, a really good calendar system, written out. I had all my competitions on the wall. I had a big yearly wipe erase calendar. Yeah. And that's really the best thing. Like, there's no technology that can beat a giant poster, a giant poster with the entire year on it, in your office or in your coach's office. So that was something that I, again, probably took for granted. But that's probably the number one thing that student athletes can do that they might not even know, is that they can manage time very well.
How does that help you? So, I would love to understand, how does having something on a wall that shows you exactly what you have to do every single day help you get better at what you're doing? How does that translate?
Sure. So it came out of utility first. I needed to know when the competitions were. So, 12 weeks till this championship or so. It became out of that for training purposes. But then also when you start to, get to a higher level and there's more travel, you need to be knowing when you're traveling. You need to know when you got to get on the airplane or when you got to get on the train to get to the airport. So it really became important, especially because I had, I was at sometimes 3-4 different facilities in the same day. I might have visited, I might have gone into the city and trained a client, with personal training and fitness in Manhattan or in Queens or something in the morning before they went to work. Then I would come back and I would, go through my morning. And then later in the day, I'd go to one coaching job and then I'd go to another facility after that. So I was always in different places. So it became really important to have all of that, written down. And I was scheduling people, for private clients. I had to make sure that they were in the schedule. So sometimes I was scheduling people, months ahead of time, competitions months ahead of time. So, that's just really something that really needed to be organized. And just looking at it from a training perspective, if you're a coach, I think that's it. You really need to think long-term. And it definitely helped me with that. And it helped me help my kids and my students too. To keep them thinking far ahead.
Exactly.
And that's huge in business, especially if you're working for yourself.
I was going to say that the thing that comes to mind is preparation. Now you know exactly what you have to do. It's you got 12 weeks of the competition, and now you know exactly how you have to prepare to be ready for either a 12-week competition, a marathon, or even on a daily basis. If you're going to 4 different facilities in a day, you have to prepare the day before. You can't just wake up in the morning and be like, okay, I'm probably going to take this subway here, and then maybe I'll make it. Like you're done. Yeah. So I think what you're saying is that get your shit in order so that you can prepare like a champion.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's overlooked. Someone asked me this the other day about technology, and I said technology hinders this, I think, because if you don't, what I found, it became more of a distraction than a help. There are a lot of tools out there that can help you, but knowing that it almost becomes a crutch. Like knowing that you can go to this and the information's there is almost a crutch. If you're going to be a master of something, you need to know yourself what it is. Mm-hmm. So one of the arguments I always got in with a lot of the kids swimming was, they didn't have their times memorized anymore. And it used to drive me crazy. I'm like, how do you know what splits you're supposed to be doing in practice when I'm asking you, if you're supposed to do this +5 goal, how do you know that? But they're like, oh, like I know where it is to find it, but I'm like, you need to know that. So a lot of it has become a distraction. There's certainly a lot of tools that can help as well, but that's something that not only student athletes and students are facing, but also people in the workforce. They've got 18 different systems. They've got a sales CRM. They've got the calendar, and it almost becomes too much, So being able to maximize the technology and streamline it, to use a swimming term, is extremely important and I think overlooked. And I think it causes people a lot of stress and anxiety to have all these different things flowing at the same time, and it becomes a distraction.
Yeah, I think you were saying the thing where, for when we go to our clients, we always tell them, look, you got 15 things, you got 20 things you're focusing on, but look, focus on the basics. Get the basics right. And especially like, even I go back to my practice when I was used to practice, or, same, you're a coach, you already know this. When someone can't make the plays, if I used to, let's say in practice, I can't do something because I'm overthinking something, the first thing the coach would say to me was, go back to the basics. Take a step back and build. And what we're doing in business instead is we start layering on more complexity versus taking a step back. Sure. And that's, I think, the fundamental flaw today that you're alluding to from a tech standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. That's another good example for sure. Definitely.
Got to go back to the basics. So talking to the basics here, Matt, when you were transitioning into your business, I think the recent rule change that we all heard about a few weeks ago with the NCAA, now players are able to make some money. I know before, until someone graduated, sometimes it was too late. You actually had 4 years of work you could have done to set yourself up for some income that didn't exist, but it does today. How do you see that affecting student athletes today? And maybe speaking from your experience on how that could have been a little different with your colleagues or friends back in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you got to break it into two categories, and it's going to be really messy over the next year or so until it works itself all out. Someone gave me a lot of information about there's going to be a lot of different states and a lot of different regulations that are in there. So who knows what's going to happen? But from a real broad perspective, I think you need to break it down into two categories. You're going to have those athletes that possibly could go pro. They're at the top, 0.01%. I don't think much is going to change for them. These are people who would have gotten some type of endorsement or played pro. So let's take them out of the equation. For the average college student who's, at a high level or at a moderate level, the great thing about this is I don't think the level, take that top 0.1% out, and the level, doesn't matter as much as, what they can bring to the table. So I think the best example for what people should be doing is considering it as a very small supplemental income that they can build over time. So, there are people with a large following, just in their own social circles that could be monetized. I'm not the expert on monetizing these things, but I did work in the fitness world for a long time. And that's an area that all of the NCAA athletes should be looking to as a reference. Now, certainly a lot of student athletes are going to be approached as well. Yeah. My advice for that would be, just do your research on, if someone approaches you, just use any resources that you might have, family who might be attorneys or something like that before you get into it, if people do approach you. But I would really use that fitness, that online social media fitness model where you get hooked up with another type of small business, like an apparel company or, a fitness product, like a fitness band or something. And, just collaborate with some people and have some conversations and see if you could help them out. I think that's really the best way to go about it, because, the big names, they're gonna, people are gonna approach them. That's gonna be worked out. This is the best people that may have had some type of pro career or endorsement. So I think that's, but I think it's a good opportunity, for sure. And hopefully pay some bills. College is not cheap. Everybody's not on everyone's not on a full ride. Yeah, we know that. So, and it's a good transition into, even into, if you take a traditional, 9-to-5 quote unquote job, and you might be able to, continue to do this on the weekends and have a little supplemental income. So I think if you have that type of expectation and you just take the slow and consistent approach, just like you would tell any athlete to do in their training, I think those are the people that are going to be, successful long-term, and really build something, over time, organically, to use an old internet term.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is there's already these big guys that, let's say, have 50,000 followers on Instagram, 100,000 followers on Instagram. Those guys and girls are probably going to get drafted or will play for the national team or already have endorsement deals that people will come to them with once they graduate. Yeah. I think what this rule does now is, for anyone that is either not at that level at a D1 school or maybe a D2 or D3 school that is not in the limelight as much, now this gives someone an opportunity to start monetizing some of the credibility, some of the media, the ability to really be out there in the community, leverage all of that work that they're already doing to start building some sort of an income stream for themselves. And I think, looking online, looking at digital, I think you hit on the head. It's all about some of these fitness folks that have done it really well. You see folks that have a small fitness company, but they have hundreds of thousands of followers because they got together with a bunch of other guys and girls, and they started doing great videos on how do you become explosive, how do you jump higher, how do you swim faster, and then they started having apparel based on the brand they've already built. So I think it's going to be pretty cool to see this pan out. But I think the biggest impact, you're right, will be someone who's not at a big school getting together and really getting something out there consistently through the digital channels that we have today, which is pretty easy to do, such as Instagram, even Facebook, and even LinkedIn. I think there's a market there, especially if you are able to target the B2B side of things.
I think that the reaction by a lot of the traditionalists, I have a lot of coaches who are, and 90% of them are, in the generation before me that hated this. I've been an advocate for this forever. I said, when we were playing video games, when the NCAA, PlayStation games were coming out, I said, they're using these people, and they're not getting credit.
Exactly.
I said, how is that right? And I remember saying, they should be able to, I don't think there can be a completely different argument of a college directly paying someone cash than, them being able to make money on the side off of their own performance. So I've been in a lot of heated discussions with a lot of the traditionalists who are coaches who are like, they're going to school, they're getting an education. I'm like, yeah, they'll still get a school and education, but they won't be bankrupt and in debt by the time they get out. Maybe they'll have a couple of bucks to pay for books.
Yeah, and looking at, I always talk about the example of digital disruption, right? So when we are speaking to companies, we're like, look, digital disruption is here to stay. Every year your business will get disrupted. It's new normal. And I think what happens is, the thing that I like about this rule from a future standpoint is the students now have the ability to start experimenting with different revenue models when they're still in school, which means versus, graduating, then trying to find a job and trying to see what they like in a world that is changing, where education is not keeping up with the digital technology change. Now, the students are almost like, hey, you know what? I can tap into different things. I can try something on Instagram. I can try something running a small business. I can try some endorsement deals. I can try something on the side that I can do now that almost gets them, a bit of training based on what's happening in the world out there today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's trial and error too.
Yeah.
So that's real learning. That's an internship. That's what an internship should be, right? So that's a great point. Even if they don't make any money, like you said, if they're trying, like, that's real world experience.
And that's what I think, when I played, like, something, because we're so busy with practice, off season, training, it was all about football for me. And it wasn't until I graduated, and most people today, once you graduate, you start saying, you know what, let me try this role for a little bit, try this role for a little bit. I think this allows people to experiment and be ready. That right now, most athletes aren't getting the opportunity to do right now. On that note, Matt, transitioning for student athletes, when somebody is ready to graduate, what are your thoughts on that? What should students be looking out for? How do you, if somebody come to you and say, hey, Matt, what kind of a role should I do as a student athlete, or even a professional athlete that is transitioning to the business? Where should they start? What would you recommend?
Sure. Yeah, number one, they should start with, what they're studying. Try to find out what the real world application for what they're studying is going to be. And I think that's kind of overlooked. I've had this discussion with a few people. I think the business schools do a better job of that. So if you major in accounting, it's a pretty clear path. You're going to try to get an accounting job, right? So that's a very simple example. But, there are a lot of school programs where, they can be an excellent program, but maybe they're not explaining exactly what the roles are, where you should be looking. And then you start to get to that last year of school, you're in competition all year, and you don't have time to really figure out what those roles are. So I think starting very early and understanding not only what am I studying, but what kind of jobs are in that career? What is that lifestyle like? Is there a lot of travel, for example? Is it behind the computer? Is it a client environment? Yeah. Find out those things and try to, figure out if your mentality and your personality fits with that. And the earlier you do that, the better. So that's the first point on that. As far as the transition itself, like I said, a lot of performance based or, high performing type of roles that you would think of, such as, investment banking in the financial world, or pharmaceutical sales, investment sales. These are all areas where those companies are looking to hire athletes because they know that they can perform under pressure. Now, however, that doesn't mean that an individual should be looking in those areas and push to those areas. Certainly that's sort of working backwards. They're looking at it from the company is looking at it from the perspective of, we need someone who's been in a challenging environment and it's been, tested in fire already. So that's what they're looking for. And there's no reason you can't examine those roles, but you want to make sure that you as an individual doesn't get pushed towards those things, just because those are thought of as athlete roles. So doing some personal examination and trying to figure out, what you should be doing as an individual, and asking a lot of questions to teachers, other professionals in the area. You can leverage alumni to ask questions. So a lot of people are, they're thinking about alumni, they're thinking about getting a job. Just ask them some questions, people who are graduated a couple of years. Get some information, you know what I mean? And again, the earlier, the better.
Yep.
As far as the actual transition, I think it comes down to, you need to figure out three points. So the intersection of, what do you like to do, or what do you care about doing? So some people call that passion. And that's just like generally the one thing that people talk about, but there's many other factors. So, what do you care about and what do you think you would enjoy doing? Number two, what do you think you would excel at? If you're not in the top 50, in the top 25%, if you're not pretty good at what you're doing, especially as an athlete, if you're not very good at what you do as your job, you're not going to stick with it and you're not going to enjoy it. So that's extremely important. Don't put yourself somewhere where you're probably not going to excel.
Yep.
And number three, so if you really don't like people, don't become a nurse or something. It's a simple example. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to have to deal with a lot of people face to face. And then the third one that comes together is, what type of environment, do you excel in? So if you are a team sport player and you love that, like that togetherness and like that really intense group of people, and you thrive in that environment, then you should try to find a similar environment at work. If you, are on a team sport and that wasn't your favorite aspect of that, you were sort of someone's like, all right, I got this. Like, I'm a little calmer. Like, I don't need to do like the really hype up stuff. Like, everybody's different. So find that environment that you're going to be successful in, whatever that might be. I mean, that comes down to the company dynamic and the culture too, but it's also the industry. So, I think that's another overlooked factor is, what's the environment like? Do I want to be in an environment where I'm traveling a lot for work? Do I want to be in a client-facing negotiation environment? Or am I really an analytical, mathematical, statistical? Do I like to find out why things happen? So all of those environmental things, I think are definitely overlooked. And even more overlooked was my second point. What are you going to excel at? Don't just get pushed towards something that you probably wouldn't be, in the top percentage of, because especially as an athlete, you're never going to stick with that long term.
I think you hit the 3 points very, very well. The one thing that comes to mind, and you just said this, is don't do something that you don't excel at. Mm-hmm. And the hardest thing for me was, hey, I got to find a job. I don't have a job, so I'm going to take whatever comes my way. Sure. And that's the worst thing one can do for your career. So
sometimes you might have to, though. So
sometimes you might have to, right? And if you do, then start working on a plan to get something that you like. So if you come back home, after 5 o'clock, start working on your skills that you need to apply for something else. Don't settle for these things, because you're right. You're just going to get miserable. The other thing that I think is unique is, instead of, categorizing ourselves as athletes that, athletes thrive under pressure, so you should go to sales. I think the other thing that athletes have, and everybody watching, listening, whether you're in business or you're a student graduating today, I think we have the ability generally as athletes to, learn new things, to learn skills. A part of being an athlete is being coachable. So what are your thoughts on maybe trying something that might seem really foreign at first, but you're like, hey, well, maybe I want to become a developer or a software developer. I didn't go to school for that. But I think the athlete mindset might allow you to do that.
first of all, the statistics would indicate that, right? Most people don't stay long term in something that's very related to their college major. Most, like half the people are in something different. So that's how it ends up anyway. It would go back to also what I said in the beginning: find out these things early. Discover something that you didn't know was out there. Absolutely, I 100% agree with you on that. You might learn something that you don't know you would excel at. I'm in recruiting. Recruiting's an interesting one. A lot of athletes end up in recruiting. No one went to school for recruiting. There's no major. But it just turns out to be something that people find. A lot of people get out of the industry that they were in to recruit in the industry that they were in. So a lot of people, they're in something like accounting or finance, and they want to get out behind the desk and talk to some people. They didn't like that environment. So then they become, they do that for 2 or 3 years and they become an accounting finance recruiter. That's extremely common. Almost everybody I know who specifically does accounting recruiting was an accountant, hated it, and got out of it. I'm not even joking. I know at least 3 people in my mind who do that in that role. But also, I just spoke with someone the other day who graduated a couple of years ago, got into finance. It was actually one of my candidates, graduated 2 years ago, and did internships in wealth management and finance. Was really going towards that. And was one of the people I was going to hire in the summer after she graduated. And she decided not to take the job and actually went back to school and did a certificate program in computer programming for UX, for UX development. I think that stands for user development. Yeah, user experience. That's it. So, you can do that. When you're young is definitely the time to do that. If you can, take another year. The one thing I always caution the student athletes in doing is going back to school right away, say for a master's in the same thing that you studied undergrad. So I say to them, I go, what's the end game on that? And maybe they have a plan, that's fine. Yeah. But I say, what's the end game on that? I go, why not get some experience and then see if this is something you want to do before you go and spend another, how much ever money on a grad degree. It's not like they were getting a new skill. If they say, okay, I have this undergrad degree. Now, I don't really know what I'm going to do. No jobs really piqued my interest. I'm able to stay at home for another year. So I'm going to take a master's in something completely different. That makes a lot more sense to me. So those are definitely some points on that. But I agree with with what you were saying before, definitely.
Well, absolutely. Last question here for you, Matt.
Sure.
Pandemic is almost over. You are back on the subway. People are hustling and bustling now. Everybody is getting us out of the pandemic mode, back to the things are normal. So from an executive standpoint, a business standpoint, large businesses, medium businesses, entrepreneurs, what would be your advice as a coach, as a leader, to everybody who right now that is trying to get back to what they were from a business standpoint?
Sure. So, everyone's got different opinions, and every business did something kind of different. So there was definitely a lot of businesses that, so in the city, for example, commercial businesses were allowed to open at something like 50% back last July. So I've been working on site for over a year now, and many people were. That became a lot more this winter. I'd say a lot of people really brought this winter. It was a noticeable difference of people coming back to offices in the city. And now in the past month, it would, I waited online for a food truck the other day for like 20 minutes, and I haven't had to do that in a long time. So it just shows which is totally normal, but I just wasn't
used to it again.
So I think everybody's different on that. Everyone has their own personal feelings. The businesses that wanted to be in the office, they still think it's important. The businesses that gave people some remote work, they're going to continue to do that. So I don't really, and every business, every industry is different. It gave them, an idea of what they could do, but I don't really think it changed anybody's mind too much as the thought process that's kind of out there in the world, is saying that. And maybe individuals, everyone has their own different opinion on that, but I don't think much has changed between different industries that thought of one philosophy one way or the other. As someone who's, you know, a student athlete trying to jump into that environment, you know, I don't know if I would do anything differently. The tools, there are more tools out there now than say when you or I, you know, was doing this in that transition period. So knowing how to network is something that's important. You know, you don't want to just go out there asking people for help. You know, you should look for people that have a similar background or a similar interest, or, you know, excel in a similar environment to you to reach out to. People are open to having conversations. I mean, I've had the best, I talk about this all the time when I talk about networking. I go to networking events. I just went to the first one on site in the city at a rooftop a week ago, and it was great. Everyone had like the same attitude. It was really good. And, you know, it's really about, you know, meeting a couple of people, staying in contact with them every 6 to 12 months. And eventually, you know, you're going to become friends and you're going to be able to help each other at some point.
Yeah.
That's really what, you know, what building a network means. It can't be forced. You can't like force it. You know what I mean? So get out there, find some people who can be contacts with you, who might be in a similar industry, who might be an alumni or something. And just, you know, just ask them if they can have a conversation with you, you know, every couple of months, because it's generally my experience that, and a lot of people would agree with me when I tell them this, but, you know, a complete stranger who you become sort of a business networking friend with is much more likely to help you in some sort of substance than people that know you personally. It's just a really interesting thing about that concept. So I think it's because when there's no direct, you know, personal relationship at a deeply personal level, I think the logical, the business side it's more effective. So that's an important factor that I've learned over the past 2 years is, you know, have business networking friends that you can just say, you know, like I said, every 6 months, meet up for dinner. Have no goal out of it, because if you do that, if you have a core of like 5 people who do similar things and have similar values to you, you know, it's not gonna get you anything tomorrow, but you know, you're gonna be adding value to each other for the long term. And when something does all of a sudden come into someone's email or whatever, you know, these are the people you're gonna think of them, and they're gonna think of you.
Absolutely.
So that's really the trick of networking is you have to have no expectation going in, or else it's not a true, you know, relationship.
Absolutely. I think you have to give value and think of it as long term.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, amazing. Well, hey Matt, thank you so much for jumping on. How can the beginning of a conversation that we started in the beginning, how can people reach you? How can they find you? We'll have your LinkedIn on the bottom, but any other ways that you'd like people to give you a shout?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is the best because I'm on there all the time. As far as, you know, personal ways to get in touch with me, shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll get to the message as soon as I can. And I definitely, anybody who's watching this, I'd be happy to answer your questions. Definitely. It's the best way to get in contact with me.
Well, that's awesome. We will appreciate it. I'm sure everybody watching this appreciates you being on the show as well, Matt. So thanks again for hopping on.
Great. Thanks so much. Have a great evening. I appreciate it.
Thank you.